This was one of the rare occasions when I found myself alone in the house, reflecting on things. It was one of those uncommon occasions. I'm Margaret, 64 years old, and I've lived in this quiet apartment for years. My children have grown up and established their own families, while my husband departed a few years ago. I've grown accustomed to the silence that surrounds me, though sometimes, especially on nights like this, the quiet seems too heavy. I decided to take a long, hot shower to unwind. The warmth of the water always soothed my aching muscles and calmed the thoughts racing through my mind. It had been a tiring day, and I needed a break from everything. As soon as I opened the door to the restroom and removed my robe, I was able to feel the refreshing breeze across my skin. Afterwards, I switched on the water, but as I was reaching for the handle of the shower, I became aware of an odd sound. I attempted to retrieve a response from the faucet by twisting it once more, but it did not respond. The tap's breakage was a fortunate event for me, as it prevented the flow of water. There was a period of time during which I stood there, feeling frustrated and unsure of what to do. My apartment was located in a small community, and like other residents, I managed to obtain the contact information of the plumber responsible for repairs. I took a deep breath, grabbed my phone, and dialed hello. I then remained calm. The voice that responded was deep and silky, and it said, "Hello, this is Margaret from apartment 3B. Following that, I remained in my flat. Before responding, the person on the other end of the telephone exhibited a momentary pause before saying, "Of course, I'll come by to look at it. It shouldn't be a problem when I get there in 15+ minutes." I let out a breath of relief and then proceeded to say, "Thank you," and then I added, "I'll be waiting." In spite of the fact that I was annoyed, I made an effort to appear cool by adding, "The shower tap in my bathroom is broken, and I need someone to come and fix it." I was attempting to appear cool. Instead of carrying on with the phone conversation, I chose to examine the broken plumbing fixture again. It didn't matter to me what had gone wrong because I wasn't in the mood to fix it myself, and I always felt more at ease when a professional was around to mend things. I had no idea what had gone wrong. I was completely aware of what had gone wrong. During the time that I was waiting, I strolled around the living room, taking in the sounds that were familiar to me, such as the peaceful ticking of the wall clock and the sounds of the heating system. When I looked at myself in the mirror, however, I couldn't help but feel self-conscious about my appearance. By the time I left the house, my hair was in a loose knot, and I was still wearing my robe. Since I hadn't had anyone in my life for a long time, the idea of a stranger invading my personal space was unsettling in a way I hadn't expected. I had no idea that this would happen. Following that, there was a gentle knock on the door, and I felt a flutter right in the middle of my chest. I was starting to get nervous. I quickly straightened my robe and opened it, and inside I discovered a tall man with black hair who was smiling cheerfully and holding a toolbox in one hand. I was surprised to see something like that. Despite his professional appearance as a plumber, there was an instant calming effect on me. He successfully calmed my nerves. His voice was deep and calming, and he introduced himself as Jack the plumber. He was pleasantly surprised. "Good evening, Mrs. Margaret," he greeted her. I decided to accept your call and nod, making an effort to avoid giving the impression that I was quite upset. "We are appreciative of the promptness with which you arrived." I showed him that the issue was only with the shower faucet as soon as he entered the bathroom. I did this as soon as he entered the bathroom. I said, "I've tried everything, but it seems to be stuck." I was referring to the situation. Jack pointed to the sink and provided all the necessary information. Jack sat down in front of the faucet, thoroughly inspecting it. His hand strength and movement confidence matched. The way his fingers worked, the way he bent, and the way he altered his stance captivated me as I watched him repair the shattered section. Every single one of these things was fascinating to me. His movements absolutely enthralled and captured me. It caused me to experience a sensation that I had never before encountered up until that point in time. Almost immediately after I became aware that I was staring at the individual, I quickly turned away from them. In spite of the fact that my heart was beating a little faster than usual, I was unable to resist the need that was developing within me. It had been a long time since I had experienced anything like this, and it seemed like a simple solution to find someone who would make me feel alive and appreciated. I eagerly anticipated this individual's approach. Jack believes that if you tighten a bolt, it should return to its original condition within minutes. In addition to expressing my respect for his speed, I nodded and thanked him for his knowledgeable contributions. The moment his eyes met mine, I was under the impression that I could see a trace of recognition or perhaps even a hint of curiosity in there. On the other hand, before I could make sense of it, he went back to his task, his broad shoulders stretching as he went. It was a brief moment when his eyes met mine, and he smiled. Following yet another step back, I became aware that the temperature of my cheeks was inching upward. There was something about him that made me feel like I was still alive, even though I wanted to act like it was just a repair job. I wanted to act as though it was nothing more than that. As more time passed, I began to have emotions of unease and restlessness. I returned my focus to Jack and observed him closely as he concentrated his attention on the faucet. I was captivated by his concentration. I looked at his hands and wondered what it would be like to absorb their confidence and skill. His hands emitted such a sense of self-assurance and capability. Given my advanced age and extensive life experience, I quickly dismissed the notion, convincing myself that this was not the intended course of events. I couldn't ignore the ache in my chest, the tug that seemed to intensify with every minute. After Jack had completed repairing the faucet, he rose up and wiped his hands on a rag. Therefore, everything ought to now function without any issues. In addition to maintaining a regular breathing pattern, I provided a tiny nod. "Your aid has been quite helpful, and I am grateful to you," Jack commented while smiling at me. He continued to fix his stare on me for a considerable amount of time, and during that time, I became conscious of an unsaid tension that permeated the atmosphere. Just being polite or saying thanks wasn't enough. I couldn't pinpoint it. After that, he made the following remark: "Place well, I'll let you get back to your evening." After that, he proceeded to make his way into the box with his equipment. It fills me with joy that I was able to accomplish this. I stood there for a brief moment, unsure of what to say, and there was a brief gap in the conversation. Due to the fact that it had been a very long time since someone had made me feel this fantastic, I fought the urge to ask him to stay a little bit longer. Something deep within me, however, urged me to beg him to remain for a little while longer than he had originally planned. "A cup of tea with me might be something that you would be interested in having." When I made the inquiry, I was surprised by the offer. "I would like to show my gratitude to you at the right level for your presence tonight." The kettle started to whistle, and I proceeded to pour the boiling water into 2 cups, adding a little honey to each of them. Finally, I poured the water into the kettle. Despite the fact that I could feel his eyes on me, I did not have the courage to turn around and look at him. Anxiety overcame me immediately after I sat down at the coffee table. It was just a moment ago that I had finished placing the drinks on the table. He did not immediately answer, but there was a spark in his gaze, an obvious warmth that caused my heart to flutter. Jack did not respond immediately. His eyes met mine, and he paused for a moment before speaking. He did not immediately speak. Well, it would be good. Despite the slight trembling in my hands as I turned on the kettle, I managed to bring him into the living room while maintaining an air of normalcy. Over his shoulder, he whispered the letter in his language. While Jack was calmly sipping his tea, he made a statement that went something like this: "It's not often that I get to sit down after a job like this. I am pleased to see that you are enjoying it," despite the fact that I smiled in an effort to hide the fact that I was quite uncomfortable. He was standing up and getting closer to me before I even realized it. Something about him drew me in, and he rose to his feet. The distance that separated us reduced as his hand reached out and gently stroked my arm. At the same time, I found that I was unable to regulate my breathing. This time, the silence didn't feel unpleasant. Instead, it felt charged, akin to the atmosphere before a storm approaches. As my heart raced rapidly, I sensed an intensification of the strain. "Margaret, I am unable to deny the fact that I have been experiencing the way I have been feeling tonight. Your presence or company makes me want to be with you," he mumbled, his voice low but confident in his promise to be sure of himself. As I gazed up at him, My heart pounded intensely in my ears. I didn't move away from Jack when he leaned down to close the distance between us, as I didn't want his lips to touch mine. At that moment, I struggled to find the right words and actions, yet I refused to retreat from the situation. From the beginning, I was hesitant, but as I answered, it became more intense, and the kiss became more intense, filled with the need that we both experienced. After moving his hand to my chest, he opened my robe and then my bra, and then he began kissing me, which brought me closer to him. He then turned his attention to me. Since his touch penetrated my entire body, I felt its warmth everywhere. It was only after we had finally parted ways that I discovered I was unable to take a breath. In a brief amount of time, we are able to do everything that I had wished for. His confession was muted, and I wasn't sure if you agreed. As soon as I smiled, I thought to myself, I do now. While Jack was laughing and running his hands over my face, the weight of all the years seemed to fall away in the silence that enveloped my flat. This occurred while Jack was laughing and running his hands over my face. Elizabeth, I do not want this to end. Jack continued to stay for a brief period, and as the evening progressed, the atmosphere between us grew increasingly dense with unsaid words. As we sat there, enjoying a cup of tea in the warm glow of the living room, the awkward silence between us gave way to an electric tension. The kiss alone didn't ignite something within me. It was his genuine recognition of me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. I had not had this feeling in almost a decade. It was never in my wildest fantasies that I would be here with someone like you. I never imagined that I would be here. My voice was slightly shaking as I said, I've been on my own for such a long time that I didn't think I'd ever feel this again. I had been on my own for a very long time. I had always believed that love and passion were associated with youth and would eventually fade away with the passage of time. However, tonight, when Jack's gaze met mine, I realized that this belief was completely false. When Jack reached out to hold my hand, his grip was firm, but there was a gentleness about it, as if he was taking care not to damage anything fragile. He was trying to avoid breaking anything that was simple to break. In an effort to take my hand, he extended his arm. Margaret, while he was whispering, traced circles with his thumb on the back of my hand. He did this while communicating with me. Sometimes the most significant events in life can surprise us. This is something that happens rather frequently. I'm glad that I was able to find you in the first place. I savored the feeling of his touch on my skin while I closed my eyes and focused on the experience. During the years that I had spent by myself, I had expressed my regret over the absence of this intimacy, warmth, and connection. Nevertheless, Jack had shown me that I had been wrong about my previous beliefs. Despite the fact that I had been repressing the urge for such a considerable amount of time, it was starting to emerge once more, and he approached me cautiously as if he were asking for permission. This time, I met him halfway, and the kiss was more intense and frenzied, as if neither of us could deny what was happening between us. I met him halfway. In the middle, I met him. While I was placing my hands on his chest, I felt the rhythmic beat of his heart beneath my fingertips. I extended my hands to his chest and let them rest there. When we finally withdrew from the scenario, I was out of breath, and my body was buzzing with a sudden energy that I hadn't experienced in years. I had not experienced this kind of energy in years. At that moment, Jack's hands wrapped themselves around my waist and pulled me closer to him. The intensity of the encounter made my breath catch when his lips tasted mine so sensitively. There was a brief moment when his forehead was resting against mine, and he and I simply breathed together, taking delight in the intimacy that we shared with one another. Margaret, you are unaware of the extent to which I have been desiring this item for an extended period of time. I've been wanting it forever. With a hushed voice, Jack murmured, You've given me a sense of youth again, as if everything matters. A grin appeared on my face, and I could feel my heart expanding. I had no idea that I was absent. I was utterly unaware of whatever was going on. We are never too old to feel this way, Margaret, and we have the ability to want to feel as though we are still living, no matter how elderly we are. While we talked about the years that had passed, hours passed without us realizing it. He reached out and touched my cheek with his thumb, and I could feel the admiration in his eyes as he did so. He touched my cheek, bringing with him the recollections of past times, the things we had brought with us, and the completed activities we had participated in. Notwithstanding this, we were unwavering in our determination to it. Was well past midnight when Jack finally got up to leave. He had delayed his departure. I rose up with him, and although I was a little bit reluctant to see him leave, I realized that the night had to come to an end at some point, and I don't want you to leave either, Jack. We both stood up together. Given how easily the conversation flowed, it seemed like we had known each other for much longer than the few hours we had spent together. For as long as I could remember, I believed that only young people still in the process of developing their identities could experience feelings of love. On the other hand, here I was in my 60s, suffering from emotions that I hadn't experienced in a considerable amount of time. Jack's smile brightened as a result of my statements, and he responded by taking my hand and pressing it to his chest. Without anything else, I'd want Margaret. I am not sure, but I am curious because we stood there holding hands for a long time and neither of us wanted to break the connection. Although I am not sure about this, I am curious about it. In that tranquil room with the city lights shining through the windows, it seemed like the outside world didn't matter. It was just the two of us and our emotions expressing what neither of us could say. Jack bent down and kissed me once again, this time with a little less intensity than the previous one, but it was still quite intense. A flutter of excitement ran through my chest as the warmth of his kiss enveloped me, and his lips came dangerously close to brushing mine. Throughout my entire body, I was able to feel the warmth of his kiss. It was a tender kiss that held the promise of more than just tonight. It marked the beginning of something truly beautiful. It was a kiss that held the promise of that. Upon waking up the following morning, I was able to glimpse the gentle rays of sunlight that were entering the blinds. I was thankful for this opportunity. It felt as if I were dreaming about the previous evening, and I did not want to wake up from it. The memory of the previous evening was still very present in my mind. I couldn't help but feel different and alive. It seemed like my long-standing void had vanished, leaving something new and hopeful in its place. While I was, a knock on the door sent my heart tumbling. Jack, and I couldn't stop smiling. I moved to the kitchen and started preparing my customary cup of tea, but I couldn't stop smiling. The way he had looked at me, the way he had kissed me. Everything about him had made me feel wanted, cherished, and seen. It was our emotional connection and ease of opening up that made me feel this way, not just our physical proximity. A knock on the door sent my heart tumbling. When I answered the door, I found Jack standing there with a broad smile on his face. I didn't know who it could be at this hour, but I opened the door. While he was quietly entering the house without waiting for an invitation, he greeted the morning with a good morning. I was constantly worried about you and wanted to make sure you were okay. I couldn't stop thinking about you. Upon seeing him, I couldn't suppress a smile and felt my heart pounding fiercely. Since he hugged me the night before and I melted into him, I am undeniably doing well. For the most part, I believe that both of us are doing well. The weight of the years lifted from my shoulders as I kissed him once more. Even though it was soft, it was full of promise, and I giggled quietly as I experienced this sensation. That Margaret and I are both in our younger years is a reasonable assumption to make. While we stood in each other's arms, the kiss lasted at a leisurely and lovely pace. And I was aware that this was not just a fleeting moment but the beginning of something deeper and true. I had never believed that I would eventually find love again, especially not after all these years. But here it was in the form of Jack, a guy who had suddenly entered my life and who offered me a new beginning in life. I had never expected that I would find love again. I could never have imagined that I would fall in love again. I discovered that my feelings for Jack continued to develop and deepen as we proceeded to spend more and more time together over the course of the coming few weeks. I found that my feelings for him continued to expand and deepen. We laughed, talked, and shared our dreams, and we loved being together despite the long time since we had known each other. Our connection and bond were the most important thing that had happened between us. Despite the fact that our relationship was unconventional in many respects, the fact that it was everything I had ever hoped did not diminish the reality that it was exceptional. Besides being my lover, Jack was my friend, confidant, and companion. Simply put, he was more than just a lover. He made me feel attractive, valuable, and loved, and I reciprocated his feelings. There was definitely no discernible age gap between the two of us. "Do you ever think about the future?" Jack asked me while we were sitting on the couch together in the evening. "Do you ever think about the future?" I cracked a smile and experienced a sense of calm for the first time in years. This was the first time in years that I had experienced feelings like this. For my eyes, it is a lovely sight. Making each other feel alive, cherished, and full of love was the most important part of our relationship. Love can unexpectedly enter your life, filling it in ways beyond your imagination. I knew we would face whatever happened after that together. Love has the ability to surprise you unexpectedly. While he was holding my hand, Jack slowly ran his fingers over my skin. He did this while continuing to hold my hand.